We have about 5 minutes until Shkia. Today is the yard site of Reb Hershel Ziditshover, one of the great Hasidic masters. And there's a story that he ran into the Ketzois, who was a great Gadol B'Yisrael, a great Talmid Chacham. He wrote commentaries on Shulchan Aruch and on the Gemara. And the Ketzois sometimes had disagreements with the Hasidic movement. There are certain Hasidic groups today that don't study the Ketzois for that reason. There were two Hasidic Rebbes. I'm not going to mention who's who because some people were upset at the story when I mentioned it, so I'm not going to say who was who. But the one Rebbe was sitting with another Rebbe that were talking, and he mentioned something from the Ketzois, and the other Rebbe, but in his Chotzer, they didn't learn the Ketzois. He said, "Oh, Rebbe, you learned the Ketzois?" He said, "Yeah, I'll tell you, I had a kasha or something, a Shulchan Aruch," and he mentioned a Chassidish sefer that this other Rebbe was Ben Acher Ben from that Rebbe, and he said, "I went through that whole sefer, I couldn't find teretz in that thing in Shulchan Aruch, the answer. But then I opened the Ketzois, was right there." So he said, "Yeah, I learned the Ketzois." But the Chassidim generally always were respectful of those they disagreed with, even ideally, if they're following the right way. And so anyway, the Ketzois, he met Reb Hershel Ziditshover, whose yard site is today. He asked him, he said, "What is the Chiddush? What's the novel presentation that the Hasidic movement has to the world? Well, there were Mekubalim, there's the Riyah Kodesh. Why is there this new movement? What did the Baal Shem Tov bring to the world that was new?" There's different versions of the story. One version of the story goes that there was someone, he was an ornithologist, and he ornithologist, the study of birds. The birds. And he comes from this island, and he mentions that on this island there's this bird. It's a new discovery to science. And then a few years later, someone comes to the same place. He too visited this island where the bird was, and he wrote a whole book with pictures, and he brought this book to the community, the whole study about this bird. And then the third person comes years later, and he brings them the bird, so they could see the bird. And so he said that the Zohar Kodesh from Shimon Bar Yochai, he mentioned there's such a thing, various things that exist in heaven. And then the Ariyah Kodesh wrote the encyclopedia. He didn't actually write it, the Chaim Vital wrote, but he wrote the encyclopedia, he authored the encyclopedia that we could study about the Kabbalah, about things, how we relate to God. And then the Baal Shem Tov brought God to us, to the people. And
what's the connection with the bird again?
Meaning that
he brought the birdie.
The third person brought the bird.
He kidnapped the birdie and he brought
or the other version.
So he brought it. Okay, now what?
Meaning they can actually see the actual bird, not just read about it in a book.
And what were the flows about the bird?
Nothing special. Just you could. A different version of the story is that they were looking for a new president in a community, or and the first person just told them, "Oh, I have this candidate," and the third person wrote a whole article about the candidate, and the third person brought the candidate that the people should meet him. So meaning,
brought down the Kabbalah to the people.
Yeah,
understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, that we had a personal relationship with God, not just. So the Ketzois said, "Get me out of here, else I'm going to become a chassid." He was very. Ideally, like I said, we're supposed to get along with our neighbors, even if we disagree. I mean, here we're talking between the Hasidim, and at the time they used to call Misnagdim. Now we don't have such an Indian Misnagdim. There's not the opposition, like there was just a different approach now. But even between, they were both holy approaches. They were both part within Judaism. But even when we have neighbors who are going the opposite direction, going away, we should still be cordial as neighbors. But sometimes they're not so polite. For example, in Cincinnati, there was a great tzaddik and big Talmid Chacham, Rav Lazer Silber. And he's also happened to be a very colorful character, very interesting individual.
Rav Lazer Silber,
yeah. So
His son-in-law was my Rebbe 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
So there was an almana who left in her tzavua, in her will, a widow left in her will, her property for the express purpose that her house should be made to a mikveh for the community, because in that area, in that neighborhood, there was no mikveh. Didn't take long. You know, in Cincinnati is the Hebrew Union College, where they ordained the Reform rabbis. Again, we could live in peace, just someone has different, but they didn't like the idea that a mikveh was being built in their neighborhood. So they wound up bringing it to court. The lawyer who defended, it happens still to this day, even we had issues here, it happens in... no, to a secular court. Okay. It happens here in Sullivan County. They try to stop it from building mikvahs and things. So, but I mean, this was 80 years ago, you know. So the lawyer who was defending Rabbi Silver, his name was Taft. He later became a big senator. He was a son or grandson of President Taft. And the judge was blind. It was an interesting thing. The lawyer for the opposite side said, you know, of course we have freedom of religion, but you can't take it so far. He said, if your honor could see this man with his long beard and this black coat, you would see a caveman. This is not what we mean by freedom of religion. It means he could be a Jew or a Christian, Catholic or Protestant. It doesn't mean he could be whatever you want. He could be old-fashioned. And so he said, I want to demonstrate to your honor how backward this rabbi is, how old-fashioned and closed-minded he is. So he said, well, that's taking it really far back. We're not taking it that far back. So the lawyer said to the lawyer who from the Reform side said to Rabbi Silver, he said, do you really believe that every word of the Hebrew Bible is true, of the Torah, of the Tanakh? He said, yes. He said, you mean to tell me, like in this week's Sedra, that you believe a donkey could talk by Bilam? So Rabbi Silver said, you know, until now I wasn't sure, but now I know. So, you know, Kedushas Levi, he brings, there's a very famous Gemara that says, Leikom Yisrael K'Moshe, that says in the end of the Chumash that no prophet ever arose among the Jewish people like Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Gemara says, B'Yisrael Leikom, Umas Olam Kom Amanu Bilam. That it says that among Klal Yisrael there was never a greater prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu, but among the nations of the world there was Bilam. It's not to mean, and so I've heard Orthodox rabbis, some from the extreme right and some from the extreme left, they've said from this we could say that even the prophets of other religions we could also call prophets, because if Bilam was a prophet, so then we're not going to mention other prophets. Now, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I have a lot of respect for other religions. They brought a lot of good things to the world, most of which they got from us, but they're spreading to the whole world. It's a good thing. They're teaching ethical monotheism, beautiful things. I don't mean this to be disrespectful. Bilam wasn't like that. Even if those others might have been good people, some were, some weren't, whatever, but sometimes the things that came out from them, like the Rambam says, it brought good to the world. Even if it brought a lot of bad, it brought a lot of good too. But Bilam, we know he's called Bilam Arasha. So the Kedushas Levi, he explains, and also anyway, Bilam's never called a Navi. So the Kedushas Levi explains, when it talks about the godless of Moshe Rabbeinu and comparing that to Bilam, it means Zela Umazeh, one opposite to the other, meaning how great Moshe Rabbeinu was in holiness, that's how evil and low Bilam was in Tumah. How great Moshe Rabbeinu was in his power of love and saying good words and blessing the Klal Yisrael, that's how negative Bilam was in his power to curse. So therefore, I don't really have time, it's time to daven already, to go into any more arichas on this Kedushas Levi. It's very beautiful, but I think based on that, not only from other prophets of other religions, we could say Bilam and anyone like him, he had a strictly non-profit organization.
What
right?
happened to the rabbi
Thank
with
you.
the long beard? What was the judge's, what he rendered as...
Oh, I don't know. I think they let him build a mikveh in there.
The judge was about
He allowed
the donkey is
Guys,